time for our children's sermon. If we have any kids that want to come up. I'm going to be the only one. Okay. No worries. I probably wouldn't come up myself. Grace to you all this morning and peace from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ. Amen. Many, many things that we could understand from the gospel. I'm focusing on the gospel with you this morning. And this missionary journey that Jesus initiates among his followers. But I want to pull out of there three lessons, just three lessons for life and for discipleship. Three lessons for life and discipleship. Number one, hopefully you discovered this already in that reading. Notice that Jesus sends out his disciples in pairs, 2 by 2. We read early on, the poet in Genesis tells us that it's not good for the human being to be alone. So God makes a helper so that the two human beings can live together and grow together and learn from one another. It is not good for us to be alone. So Jesus sends out his disciples in pairs so that they could have encouragement and strength from one another. And they wouldn't have to try and figure it all out themselves. A good message for us, not just as disciples and followers of Jesus. Sometimes you're a little reluctant to share your faith, but there's somebody else there who will help you to do that, who is also a little reluctant, but might, with your help, be willing to talk a little bit about what God has done in their lives. It becomes so much easier, which is probably one of the reasons that we gather together as God's people on Sundays. It's to gain encouragement and inspiration from one another. Jesus did not send his disciples out alone. Don't go it alone. Lesson number one. Jesus had a certain amount of territory that he wanted to cover. If he had sent them out singly, he probably could have covered more territory. But the problem would have been that in that case, he would have been twice as efficient and half as effective. Because without somebody to encourage you and help you and build you up, and without the opportunity to do that for somebody else, our work, our life, our inspiration is much less effective than it could be. For this reason, God established and builds human society on couples, on two people together who will then have a family, contribute to that society, and so we see that God did not intend for us to be alone, not in our lives, not in our mission, not in our work. So lesson number one, don't go it alone. Lesson number two, Jesus sends out 70. Only a handful of people. Now allow me to use myself humbly as an example. Thanks to the witness of other people, I have helped a number of folks along the way. Just me. Now, if you had told me that I would have that ability when I was a kid, I never would have believed you. I didn't even hear the call to ministry then. And yet God has been able to do some pretty good things through me, for which I am thankful. And the truth of that is that sometimes I have been a handful to God. You see what God can do with a handful, even a handful like me. If God can do that with me, God can do that with you. That's the good news. Jesus only sends out a handful of the disciples to do some good things for the sake of the kingdom, to bring good news, to remind people that God is present in their lives and concerned for them. Only a handful, 70. Anybody want to take a wild guess? Just pick a number out of the air. What the average attendance is in a Lutheran church in this country?
25.
70. Isn't that weird? 70. That's all it takes. And notice what happens when those 70 return from their missionary journey, from their work of discipleship, from their evangelism, from giving themselves over to God's cause and purposes in their lives. They say, Lord, even the demons submitted to us in your name. Even the demons. We had such tremendous power. And Jesus, in response to their enthusiasm and the results of their labor, says, I saw Satan fall like a flash of lightning from the sky. He wanted them to know that what they were doing in their own humble way, with this small handful of people, was actually changing changing the powers that be, was rearranging the powers of the universe. That's what they were doing. He wanted them to know that, but then he noticed how he brings them back down to reality. He says to them, yet don't rejoice in this, but rejoice that your names are written in heaven. Rejoice that you have a place in the Father's heart. Rejoice that you are known and loved by God, not just now, but forever. Rejoice in that reality. It's a very important reason that Jesus tells them that, which is actually lesson number 3. Jesus sends out 70. They come back with this wonderful report of all the great things that they've been able to do. We notice that the average Lutheran congregation in our country worships about 70 people on a Sunday morning. And if you're anything like me, you ask the question, so how come those 70 people in their Lutheran congregation aren't doing the same kinds of things with the same kind of power that those 70 did that Jesus originally sent out on that missionary journey? Where did the power go? Where did the influence go? Many people who gather together in churches these days will look around them and count 70 and say, oh, I remember when we used to have 170. I remember back in the day when we had 700 people in church. Now we're only 70. How come God isn't doing the same things now that God did back then? A common question for people who are nostalgic like we sometimes tend to be. Lesson number 3. You ready for this? It's always the hardest one. Let go. Let go. Jesus says to those 70 that he sends out, take nothing extra with you. Just go. Don't greet anybody on the road. Just go. There's work to be done. Go now. Don't go home and pack a suitcase. Change your email message. Change your voicemail message. Make sure you stop the newspaper delivery. Just go. Because there's work to be done. And it needs to be done now. On Wednesday, we leave for vacation, Marianne and I. I'm thinking about what I need to pack. May I tell you this? I'm wondering if I have enough underwear for a 12-day vacation. Is this that important? Never mind. Just go. Vacation is a wonderful opportunity to relax. If we could just let go of all those things we think we have to do before we go on vacation. But it's hard to do that because somebody has to take care of it, which is why I am married. God bless you. But we're trying to fix things and arrange things and make sure everything is under control and taken care of, and that's what we do so often. And why doesn't God do the same things now that God did then? Because I think perhaps God's people have a harder time letting go. Letting go in healthy and meaningful ways. Letting go. Now, well, you know, the 70 could just go out and grab whatever they had and depend on the hospitality of strangers. And they come back and say, we did wonderful things. But now, well, somebody's got to make sure things are taken care of. And churches have buildings and responsibilities and payrolls and all the kind of stuff that's really important that we have to take care of. And it's hard to let go of all that stuff, to just be engaged in ministry. It's hard to just let go. And we have plans for our lives and places we want to go and things we want to do and things that we want to make sure we take care of. And it's hard to just let go. And if we let go, what if things fall apart? That's our biggest concern. What if things don't work out the way they need to? What if we come home and at the worst, there's a pile of newspapers on the front steps and everybody knew we were away? What if our children go off in the wrong direction? Our life doesn't work out the way we intended it to. We don't find out that we're healthy as we need to be, etc., etc., etc. All those concerns that immediately pile themselves on our minds when we have a little bit of time to just stop and think about the what ifs. And it could be, and you never know. And so we have a really hard time trusting God enough to just let go. Even to let go of the results. I wonder of those 70 who came back. Pure speculation, mind you. No gospel witness for this whatsoever. But I do wonder of those 70 who came back, What if only 60 of them were successful? What if there were 10 in the back going, man, we had a lousy time. All we did was wipe the dust off our feet from town to town. Nobody welcomed us. But they stayed in the back, and the 60 were like, this was great, Jesus, let's do it again. And the 10 walked away to pick up their bag and their sandals and their wallet and go a different direction. Maybe. But to just trust, to let go, to believe that God can do wonderful things through you, if you trust God to do that, is a mighty leap of faith. It invites us to lose control to a God who is always in control. Now, how do we do that? I have a suggestion that also comes from this gospel. The 70 come back and they say to Jesus, even the demons submitted to us in your name. And Jesus says to them, don't rejoice in that. Isn't that interesting? He says, don't rejoice in that. He says, rejoice that your names are written in heaven. Here's what happened to the church. We start to get power. We, the church, from earliest times, started to think, we're in charge. We're in control. We're rejoicing in what we can do, what we've managed to accomplish. And we forgot to allow a little bit of space in there for God to accomplish what God needs to do in self-giving, in sacrifice, in surrender. We thought, okay, this is working out. It's up to me. How do I do it again? How do I reproduce the results? How do I make this happen? And God says, no, I'll make it happen. You just have to go. You just have to trust me. You just have to speak the word. You have to take the risk. You have to know that I'm taking care of you, that I'll look over you. But we have a hard time doing that. We tend to hunker down and circle around and try and focus on making it work. And don't worry, church. There's always another program. There's always another answer. There's always somebody who has an idea for how you can make your life better, your congregation better, your ministry better, your health better, all those things. If you're curious about this, go to the self-help section of any bookstore or check it out on Amazon. Do a search for self-help books or personal coaches or anything like that. Be prepared. The responses are innumerable because people will help you figure out a way to do it better. But God says, trust me. Trust me. Follow me, says Jesus. It's not about the results. It's about letting go. A couple times along the course of his ministry, Jesus is very confrontational with his disciples about this. Whoever would follow me must deny themselves, he says, take up their cross. Whoever does not forsake mother and father, sisters and brothers, family, friends, cannot be my disciple. Why does Jesus say these things that are so confrontational and off-putting to us? Because he wants us to have our priorities of discipleship in the right order. God first, then us. God sets the agenda, we follow. Jesus says go, we go. Not I say go, Jesus, come along. Wrong order, wrong priority. Trust me first, says God, all the time. Trust me first. Hard to do. We get our own plans in our minds. We don't want to let go. We think that this will work out. Worse yet, we make our plans and then ask God to bless them because they must be right. You know what we call that? We call that idolatry. Putting me first. Is this easy to do? Absolutely not. Do you work it out on the grand scale? I know that in 5 years God will have me here or 10 years there. You don't. Again, in the famous words of Pastor Kathleen Coran, God gives us only enough light for the next step. The next step. We want to know what's down the road. God says, what's right in front of you? Where are the opportunities that God is presenting to you today? In 5 minutes? This week? to let go and serve, to answer the call to be God's disciples in the world, to bring good news, hope, light, strength, to be challenged so that you have that ability to let go and trust God. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, Jesus said to those disciples whom he sent out, because they would have been holding on too tight to them. And they wouldn't have trusted God to fill their hands with what they needed. They came back rejoicing because they surrendered themselves to God and God did wonderful things. Now, I do not expect y'all to come back to me next week and say, hey, what a great week. We saw Satan fall like lightning from the sky. We cast out demons. We healed the sick. We converted 300 people in 1 week. And I do hope that you take that next step and see enough light for it, enough trust for it, that God will not let you down. 3 lessons. Don't go it alone. There's so much more fun to do it together, to be in community with one another. Number 2, God can do an amazing amount of things with only a handful of people, energy, willingness, desire. Number 3, let go. God will be there for you, especially in the form of this community of faith. Let go, because God waits to catch you and carry you and bring you to a new place.